6:30. Welcome back to breakfast on GB News this morning with Martin and myself, Rosie. Let's take a look at the front pages.
And the Guardian's front page leads on Scotland's new gender laws passed yesterday with the headline "Number 10 threatens to block Scottish law on legally changing gender."
The Daily Mail leading with the same story, Scotland's gender laws. We'll look at that in a moment. And the report that the SNP, they say, are on a collision course with Westminster. Well, the law is a bill that will let 16-year-olds change their gender without a medical diagnosis.
Murderer was free to kill after probation blunders is the headline leading the Telegraph this morning, as probation services are facing backlashes for deeming Damien Bendel a medium risk.
And the Mirror leads with the King's Christmas security fears amid concerns that King Charles's Christmas walkabout may be disrupted by protesters.
And the Times leads with rising flu cases and health officials warning anyone with a cough or a cold to avoid spending time with vulnerable relatives and grandparents this Christmas. How do you do that?
Well, let's go through the papers now. Joining us this morning to do that is senior reporter from the newspaper, Benjamin Butterworth, and also Director of Operations at the Adam Smith Institute, Morgan Schoenmeister. Thank you very much, both of you, for joining us. Let's start with this. It's very contentious for 6:30. But Benjamin, front page of The Guardian, what is happening in Scotland? How have they changed the law? And Westminster aren't happy.
So the willingness, the ability to have your gender, if you change gender from the one on your birth certificate, the ability to change that has been reformed so that at the moment in the rest of the UK you have to illustrate for 2 years that you are the gender you're living as, and now in Scotland you'll be able to get that legal recognition at 3 months, so much sooner. And that was passed late last night in Scotland, and it's the biggest rebellion that the SNP has had during its 15 years in power. And now today Number 10 has said that they might block that because gender laws are devolved to the Scottish Parliament, but equalities laws, which this affects, as you can imagine, are not devolved. And so Number 10 Downing Street might overrule the Scottish Parliament, which I think, quite aside from the individual case of the gender questions, would be a crazy thing to do when support for independence is so finely tuned at the moment.
But a key point around this, Benjamin, is there's no need for a medical diagnosis. It's self-identification. So on that basis, isn't this worth going to battle about? Because this is a huge, huge change. And also, is this about Scotland trying to make its own laws and devolve, uncouple itself bit by bit, and therefore Westminster has to take a stand?
I mean, look, when you ask about whether Westminster should block Scottish Parliament from having these gender laws, well, it strikes me as odd that they only decided it might not be a devolved issue after it was passed. You know, these were first proposed 6 years ago, so it's quite striking that they changed their mind after the Act happens. But on the question about medical diagnosis and not having to have one, in order to get the recognition at the moment, the 2-year point in this country, in England that is, you have to have demonstrated, you have to have lived, for example, if you're a trans woman, so male to female, you have to have lived like that for 2 years. And so this isn't affecting how people will behave or what bathrooms they might use, which is an example sometimes opponents give. This is about giving them the protection, the legal rights, the safety in themselves, and hopefully the mental comfort at an earlier stage. And, you know, Ireland, our neighbouring country, has had this in place for a few years and not had any problems.
The question, Morgan, is do you think Scotland have made the right decision? And if they have, should Westminster intervene?
I think it's an interesting one. I think, again, as Benjamin says, quite aside from the specifics of the law itself and how you feel about gender recognition, there are a few ways in which this law is diverging from UK-wide law. And if that's the case, if the government wants to take a stand and say, actually, we do need to intervene because it contravenes the UK law, like the equalities law, and that's something the government, it would be unprecedented. They haven't intervened in this way before, and they only have 4 weeks to decide. So it's really going to be an issue that's not going to go away.
Do you think Scotland have made the right decision?
That's not for me really to say, honestly.
Very diplomatic.
Well, I mean,
do.
Benjamin does. I mean, I have questions about the age going down to 16 because what we consider an adult in the UK is 18. So if Scotland is saying that you can make these legal changes at age of 16, I think that's kind of a very fundamental change. But if it were 18-year-olds and the time limit were decreased, I wouldn't be as concerned.
But Benjamin, don't you think that there are an emerging and growing number of individuals who regret going through a transition, and if that process is shortened, then as far as proceeding perhaps towards surgery, it's something that we should really be cautious about.
First of all, in order to be eligible for surgery, you already have to have done 2 years, right, in order to get the gender recognition
but now it's
before
6 months.
Yeah.
Is that the issue?
But then the delays for that are many more years after that, because there's a shortage of supply to help those people. So you're not just getting that. But this idea that people are going to pretend that they're a gender that they're not, it's just farcical. It's not what happens.
It could be confusion. There's lots of people who are gay, who may have been quite happy to be gay people without making transition. There is a lot of evidence coming off people with regret after transitioning. And surely, if we're pushing that process down to a shorter period, we're creating more issues.
Well, I don't accept that at all, because there are far, far more people who will spend their entire lives hiding and disguising the fact that they are not comfortable in something as fundamental as their gender. In fact, there are many people that won't even recognise that in themselves because they never knew such a thing existed. It was the 50th anniversary of the first ever Pride in Britain this year, and I spoke to some of the people involved in that. And overwhelmingly what they said, which blew my mind, was that they didn't even know they were gay because they'd never heard of such an idea. But that didn't mean they weren't. And so when people say the numbers of people transitioning or saying they're of a different gender is much higher than it was 10 years ago, well, that's now because they feel some comfort to express themselves and some legal protection. And I think that's a better thing.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. I do think we still need to tread very carefully, especially when it comes to, again, people under the age of 18 accessing what could be life-altering hormones or treatments. But at the end of the day, I do also believe that adults have every right to make decisions which benefit them and their personal well-being within the confines of the law.
And I would just say that one of the other things that's cropped up that Scotland has a divergent view on is that they don't have to inform the parents if at school a child is saying they are, if they look like a boy but they're saying they're a girl. And I think that's absolutely right, because the idea that a parent who holds a particular prejudice, a particular bigotry, as far as I'm concerned, if they don't let
parental protection, it's not just bigotry and prejudice. They have genuine concerns and should be consulted.
If a parent tries to stop the child being themselves in the most fundamental way, as far as I'm concerned, that's child abuse. Many gay kids wouldn't tell their parents still to this day because they're terrified of the prejudices they might hold. And I think they should be comfortable in that.
A very contentious topic. Join the conversation yourself. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Let's look to something a little bit lighter if we can. And there's a photograph. Well, actually, she's on the front page of many of the papers, Morgan, on the front page of the Daily Express and the Times as well. This is going to be a weekend where we look at the royals. We're going to hear from the King in a very different way with that King's speech on the weekend. So just tell us, Kate this time takes centre stage. What's she got to say about the Queen?
Yeah, so this is Kate's second annual carol service, which happened at Westminster Abbey, and they'll be airing it this weekend as part of their festive productions.
Nice.
And she used it as a tribute to her late Majesty, and it is kind of this turning over of a new leaf in the royal family. They're obviously dealing with a lot of publicity right now, both positive and negative, and Kate is really using this opportunity to say we owe so much to the Queen, and at the same time we need to honor her legacy and also move on. And it hit me yesterday that we will be seeing the first King's speech at Christmas.
What kind of tone do you think he's going to take?
I think it will be similar to Kate's tone. I think he will, commemorate his mother and her late Majesty and really show that this is a new era. He's always been quite progressive when it comes to religion and accepting of all people, so I don't think it will be particularly religious remarks.
I also hope, for the new year, that this marks a return to a more stateswomanlike and kind of regal royal family, and we can get away from the celebrity froth and tittle-tattle, Benjamin.
I mean, I am, as odd as it might be as a lefty, a massive royalist, because I just live for the drama, and my God, they bring the drama consistently. But I always sit down at 3 p.m. on Christmas Day and watch the Queen's speech, as it's always been before. And so I can't wait to see how it will feel and how it will look. I think it'll be very peculiar for a lot of us, but there's probably going to be a big emphasis on how many people watch it, because there's a story in the Daily Mirror today about how there's fears that the walkabout they family do after the church service, that there might be eggs thrown, there might be protests.
Because we've seen twice now, very recently, the King is walking about, and then you are so exposed to the public, and they've got to do that. They've got to have that type of relationship which says we're visible, we're available, you know. But it's been scuppered on 2 occasions already.
It has, yeah. I mean, I have to say, you remember the one in, I think it was York, where they throw the egg, and I mean, Charles really was completely unbothered by it, even though it could have been anything, really. He's clearly, you know, at 71, I think he is, pretty relaxed about the whole thing. To be honest, I think the Daily Mirror putting it on the front page that there could be protests probably makes it more likely that the idea is planted in some people's heads. I don't think anyone's really that bothered to protest on their own Christmas morning. Most of the people sat there could, you know, barely walk for themselves, let alone throw an egg, I think.
Yeah, it's going to be a really interesting one to watch because, you know, I think a great many people, you know, GB viewers and myself, really miss the Queen. And it's going to be a real moment, I think, of even though we've seen the banknotes, we've seen, you know, the ceremony. I think that the speech itself is so talismanic. I think it's going to be quite
a great word. What's it mean?
Yeah, symbolic of something awesome.
Yeah, I think, but it is going to be a moment when a lot of us really start to recognise that she's not there, and I find it. I mean, it blows my mind that it was, only September 8th, I think, that she died. I mean, that was incredibly recent. And you think about what the royal family has been through with Harry and Meghan. You know, I think, regardless of your opinion of them, that's a particularly cruel few months they've had. It can't be nice for anyone.
Well, of course, we'll bring you the speech live here on GB News, and our royal reporter, Cameron Walker, is going to be on hand to take us through it as well. You might be busy with your Christmas meal at that time and maybe never watch it. Morgan, let's also look on the front page of the Times. Skip starters, says Nigella. She is a woman who loves to indulge and encourages others to do the same. Why no starter for her on Christmas Day?
She says she doesn't understand how people can eat starters as well as a full turkey dinner. And I do agree. I like the grazing across the day approach. So start with a nice breakfast, some starters for breakfast, and then move on to the full meal later. But I mean, you've got all your sides, you've got everything. So I don't blame her for...
So what's on your table?
So it's traditional. You got all the trimmings, so turkey, pigs and blankets, roast potatoes, parsnips,
We had some bizarre advice yesterday on the programme to say, I think it was Dr. Michael Mosley who was saying, for your roast potatoes, the nutrition is in the skin, and what you should do is boil them the night before, skin on, leave them, and then roast them like that.
Heresy.
It seemed very strange to me.
Sounds like a lot of extra effort for a couple
he was saying it was more convenient, which I didn't believe at all. Will you be skipping a starter?
I didn't even know starters for Christmas dinner was a thing.
Lots of people apparently this year having prawn cocktail.
Oh God, I mean, no. I've never had prawn cocktail. Yeah, exactly. You know, each their own. But my starter is sort of a box of chocolates at about 9 a.m.
That's all.
You know, and you know, the little coins that you get that we hang on our tree, the chocolate coins. So, I mean, I can't really judge people having a prawn cocktail when I'm 47 mini Cadbury's down.
Do you know, it's nice to talk about something positive because we conducted this poll at GB News, which concluded, very sadly, 57% of the people surveyed said they think Britain is nothing's working.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm going to be getting the train back to Manchester at some point today, so I might sort of have to get back to you on whether anything works, because I'm slightly anxious. I've been looking at the app and there's apparently lots of trains running, but I know everyone trying to get home this week to all different parts of the country has been having absolute hell, so it does feel like nothing works.
Yeah.
Is that fair, though? It's a very sweeping statement to say nothing in Britain's working.
I mean, everything's on strike, so that's, you know, that's quite a good sign that nothing's working.
I'd challenge you to point something out that is working well now.
GB News is working.
GB News is working well,
We're getting a shift in. But otherwise, I mean, I'm travelling back today on the train, and Benjamin, I share your concern. So I booked a ticket 3 weeks ago because I knew the strike was starting, because obviously I talk about strikes all the time. I got a text yesterday saying, yes, your ticket's still valid, but forget about your seat reservation. So, all right, 3 weeks planning, I'll be standing up like this for 2 hours all the way back, I bet you.
I mean, this time last week, I got the train from Manchester to London to do breakfast papers. I was meant to get home at 10 p.m. and I actually got home at just gone 2 a.m.
Right.
So, you know, I did get there, but it was heavily delayed because they didn't have anyone to drive the train, and there wasn't even a strike on the West Coast main line.
Yeah, that's the difficulty, isn't it? When you're scuppered and you think, well, there wasn't even a strike today, what's going on? Another thing I want to ask you about in this poll, very briefly, if we can, the most competent Prime Minister of the year, Morgan, who do you think that's been?
one that we've had this year.
This year. You've got 3 to pick from.
Well, I think we can rule out one. So I think it'll be Boris or Rishi. I think people still quite like Boris, even though they had all the scandals.
Why? Why is there that kind of Boris glow?
He's just the personality, isn't it? I mean, I feel like even in the darkest of days, he still had quite a lot more support than you would expect from a person in his position.
Yeah, it's actually 32% chose Boris, 29% Rishi. Does that surprise you, Benjamin, or is it just the best of a bad lot?
I mean, what's hilarious is the fact that there's even a choice of 3 of them for 1 year. Just to reflect on that is mad. It doesn't surprise me that there's some popularity for Boris Johnson. I think it's a bit like we've settled down with a stable, healthy husband, and kind of looking back to the university romance is kind of how you might reflect on Boris Johnson. At the time, most people were pretty certain, about 60% in most polls, until he went, didn't want him there. So I think that's probably more indicative.
Well, we'll be looking through the poll a little bit more and more stories from the papers in the next hour. Benjamin, Morgan, both, thank you very much.